Welcome to the Seminole Wars. In this podcast, we explore how the Seminole Wars came to be, how they were fought, and how they still resonate some 2 centuries later. I am your host, Patrick Swan, and our show is a production of the Seminole Wars Foundation, found online at www.seminolewars.us. We are recording today from the homestead of the Foundation in Bushnell, Florida. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome. By now, listeners should be well aware that the Dade Battle, the fight that started active engagement in the Second Seminole War, is commemorated each year in the first full weekend in January with a military reenactment. Seminole Wars Foundation President Steve Rinck advises listeners that select groups visiting the Dade Battle Memorial Trail sometimes encounter living historians and sometimes encounter war reenactors. These include a trader or sutler, Seminole Indians, Black Seminoles, and an immigrant army private, just trying to keep his head down and get out of this war alive. Steve Rinck, welcome to the Seminole Wars.
Thanks, Patrick.
Tell us about these living historians or military reenactors one may find.
We have, as you say, living historians along the Fort King Trail that meet these folks. We have a civilian who does a trader type of concept. We have a gentleman or two who might portray a Seminole Indian. And then there's the military soldier who talks to the folks going down the trail. And he's a fellow named Paddington McCormick is his name, as a matter of fact. And I'm the lad who does that one. I'm an Irish-Immigrant, you see. Someone over to the United States in the 1830s, trying to find a better life for myself, and maybe even more importantly, be able to make some money to send home to my family back on Ireland. I know I'll never see them again because it's a one-way trip. We don't have enough money to afford to go on both ways. But Paddington McCormick, his friends call him Paddy. He's a good old Irish boy. As a good number of the troops were at that time, you know, sir. Up to 40% of the army in the 1830s and 40s came from Europe and elsewhere. Canada, but mostly from Europe. And the lion's share of those lads who came from Europe were Irishmen, you see. And so Paddy is one of those folks who come in. And he enjoys talking to the people who come up the Fort King Trail and asking about what's the experience of it down here. What happened on this trail? Tell me a little bit more in private.
Paddy came from Ireland to New York. How did Paddy get into the United States Army? Was it just the luck of the Irish?
You might say so. Paddy came from County Derry, lived there all of his life, but came over on a ship and he landed in New York Harbor and he gets off the gangplank and there's a fella looking like the soldiers that we have in the Second Seminole War in a blue uniform. He had my name down. He called me over and he says, "Paddington McCormick, are you?" He says, "Would you like a job in the United States?" I said, "Sure, I would." He says, "Well, how would you like a job in the Army? We give you food every day, we give you clothes and a dry place to sleep at night." I said, "They get paid too?" "Sure, you get paid, $6 a month." So I said, "Sign me up." But of course, I had to put the X down where he showed me because I cannot read or write, you see. I never learned to do those things back home in Ireland. So I signed my name, and the fellow told me, he says, "Well, now," he says, "you come back now. This is Friday." He says, "You come back in here at 5 o'clock in the morning on Monday, and we'll get you suited up, and we'll get you going." So that's what I did. That's how it happened. That's how I became a soldier in the U.S. Army.
Where did you think you were going to do your soldiering?
Well, I didn't have much of a mind about it. I mean, I looked around. I'd never been to the United States before. And all they did was go down the streets of New York, and I thought that most of New York looked like, most of the country looked like New York. I had no idea that there was wilderness out there. I had heard stories, but I didn't really experience it myself. And I didn't really see it there, too, because I got back on a boat, and he said, "Well, we're going to send you down to the territory of Florida." I said, "Well, wait a second." He says, "Oh, you'll love it from Florida. It's south of here. It'll take you several days to get there." He says, "But they call it the land of flowers. And the milk and honey dripping off the trees. You'll love it. Plenty of game, and the temperature is moderate all year round." Well, my friend, I tell you, when I made it to Florida, I came in actually from New Orleans. We went around the whole peninsula of Florida and went into New Orleans first. And it's attached to General Gaines, you see, goods company. So when I finally arrived in Florida, I don't like it. It's like a jungle. It's hot all the time, and the uniform is the wear. Oh, my stars! It's a woolen uniform, and it's hot, and we only get to change it to twice a year. It's a terrible it's feeling. And you go in the bush around Florida, the jungle of Florida, and you don't know what to expect here. It's serpents, frogs, alligators, Seminoles, and all other forms of loathsome reptiles. You could be a heathen hiding behind every other palmetto. You don't know what to expect. I hate it in Florida. I had no idea it would be like this. I'll tell you what, I do. Most of the boys I served with wish they could be anywhere else. It's not a pleasant place to be.
What type of action have you seen here in Florida? You're serving under General Gaines?
Well, yes, under General Gaines. And so General Gaines came across the bay, or the Gulf of Mexico, and landed at Fort Brooke in February of 1830 in January. His assignment was to go north on the Fort King Trail and to discover what happened at the poor site, that melancholy site, which is now the massacre site of Dade and his men. So I was attached to him there. We saw some Seminoles along the way, not many. I was told that before this whole work started up, that there were Seminoles living outside of Fort Brooke, and they were coming. They even did some work for the soldiers once in a while, but not now. Not since they went on this terrible rampage and killed these poor soldiers up there. You don't see many of them along now, but you see some once in a while poke his head up around the trail. They know where we are. They follow us. But I've not come in contact with one directly myself.
How are they feeding you?
Oh, they feed us. Oh, that was a promise. They feed us 3 squares a day. The problem is, it's all the same thing every day. Oh, each soldier is issued a daily issue of 1 1/4 pound of fresh or salt beef, 1 1/4 pound of cornmeal, and we get some salt pork or bacon, and 18 ounces of hard bread, as a matter of fact. Of course, we have our issue of vinegar, and we have the salt and sugar, and they give us coffee. It's not very good coffee. Not like the officers get. They put chicory in ours and try to stretch it around a little bit more that way. But they try to take care of us. You know, we have to drink 1 1/4 ounces of vinegar every day. I asked the camp surgeon, I said, Doctor, why is it that we drink the vinegar? He said, oh, in case of the scurvy, don't you know, Paddy? I said, oh, I didn't know that. I said, that's a loathsome thing. He said, yes, we do it. And they help us to be clean, too. They really emphasize cleanliness. We're required to wash our face and hands every day. Our feet at least twice a week. We have to shave and brush our hair every day. And they want us to bathe weekly, you see, but we're out on maneuvers, so that may not be as possible as it is back at the fort. And I'll tell you one thing, is something too, is that they're very generous. They issue 1 bar of soap and 1 toothbrush for every 8 man to shower, you see. Yeah, well, they picked me out to be the person to actually carry the toothbrush, you see, because most of the Irish boys, we have our own teeth, all of our teeth. Most of the other fellas there in Launch or Ireland haven't lived on a farm too long, or they don't have many teeth in their mouth. In fact, there's a regulation in the army that you have to have at least 2 opposable teeth to be a soldier. I didn't understand why that was until I went out for my first time on the field firing a musket. You have to have 2 teeth to bite down on your cartridge to put your gunpowder and your shot into your musket in order to fire it. So if you couldn't do that, you wouldn't be much good in the field, you say.
You have 2 opposable teeth.
I do. I have more than 2. I have pretty much a whole mouth that is full of teeth. And I asked the doctor, I said, why is that so? He says, oh, back on the farm in Ireland, did you have a milk cow? Sure, I was drinking milk every day. I said, that's why you have good teeth. And I said, doctor, I don't understand. Why is drinking milk make you have good teeth? And he says, Paddy, it's 1836. We don't know why this is. We just know that it happens, so keep on doing it. Drink milk when you can. So we don't find milk very often, but we try to drink it as we can.
What is a typical day like for a soldier? They put some training in you? They have you march around?
They do. They train us in the Napoleonic tactics of warfare. They train us in the manual of arms was written by General Winfield Scott back in the last war that they said they fought here in the 18 and 12. They train us in those. They go through a 20-step regimen to load and fire your musket. I haven't mastered it yet myself, and the sergeant keeps on getting on me for that, but I keep on trying the best I can to master it. And they do marches. They have drills every day. They have active drills. And other than that, if we're at the fort, we're at some kind of a camp, encampment. They have jobs to do. We do basically whatever we're told to do, whatever the officer of the day tells us is our duty.
I saw the Fort Foster. I saw all these tents outside the fort. And I thought, well, you have a contained fort here. This is where you want to keep the troops inside. But no, the troops were sleeping outside. That's very strange to me.
Well, I was never stationed at Fort Foster. I went through the area from going to Fort Brooke on our trip to Fort King. But I never was stationed there. But yes, I know what you mean. I've seen those tents as well in different places. There's a room that they say that I had the same thing happened up at Fort King when I arrived there. I saw the multiple tents around the outside.
Tell me about these groups that come through. They ask a lot of questions, don't they?
All the groups are marvelous, you see, darling. These are officers or aspiring officers sometimes, and they come from all military branches. But you never know what they are, or what their rank is, or what branch they're in, because they come in the civilian togs, you say. They're not in uniform. And that's one of the things that I do when they approach me. I like to be right and chide them a little bit, because they're walking up the 14 trail and never know when there's going to be an Indian jumping out on them. And I say, well, here you are up in the wilderness, and you're marching up with you're not even in uniform. What kind of a soldier do you claim to be? And oftentimes they have females with them as well. And of course, I chide the men about that. And I said, you bring the women out here too. Have you no care, have you no honor to protect the women from the heathen out in the field? And they have a good laugh at that usually. But yes, these are military groups, and they're the ones who ask the best questions of us. And so they're already schooled. They already are familiar with the battle when they get there. As I said, they have to read it in their curriculum book, just like good schoolboys and girls. They read about it. So they know pretty much about the battles. That's why I try to convey to them the life of a soldier and what it was like to live in the 1830s in Florida. That's my main goal, is to do that, to give them an idea about what it was like. And of course, I fire my musket, allow them to see and hear the retort and smell the gunpowder in the morning. And so they have a good time.
How does your musket stand up to the rifles that the Seminoles are using?
Oh, well, the musket that we're using, my dear, you see, it was an model 1816, 69 caliber, smooth bore musket. The smooth bore means it has no grooves in the inside like a rifle does. The rifle is a lot more accurate because when it fires its projectile, it's spinning like a top when it comes out, you see. So it's a lot more accurate to go where you're shooting at. But the musket that we have is the technology from it is about 140 years old. It dates back to the 1600s, the basic mechanism behind a flintlock musket. But of course, the Indians, most of them had trade rifles, you see. They get them from the Spanish or the British traders that go through the territory of Florida. So they're lighter. They don't fire as heavy of a shot, but when they do fire something, they're more likely to hit what they're aiming at. The range is not as great as ours, but it's a lot more deadly. And besides that, they don't fight like gentlemen, you see me there. They don't do that. We were trained, as I said, in the Napoleonic Code, where when you face the enemy across the field of battle, now, one half of the troops takes a knee, and the other half stands behind them. When one fires a volley of muskets, as they're reloading, the other one fires. As they reload, the first one does. You get the idea. And so they don't understand. And we're schooled and we're trained to see the enemy in front of us marching toward us. These Seminoles do not fight like gentlemen. They hide behind trees, even in the trees, you see. And they fire at us. We can't see them ahead of time. We see a wisp of smoke, and we train our muskets toward them, toward that spot, but they're not there anymore. They went somewhere else to hide like dogs underneath the bush. So we really can't. There's no way. It's like somebody said it's jungle warfare. That the United States Army never experienced that before. So it's something that we have to really examine. I think our officers and our leaders have to examine that in the future and maybe redesign how we conduct ourselves out in the field in the jungle like Florida.
Paddy, did it give you an alcohol ration?
Well, you might not, it's not really a ration, you see. The officers had their rations. But mostly if we were to, sometimes we do a little favor for the officers here or there. We could get paid extra by doing that, you see, too. We could even give up one meal a day and earn anywhere from 15 to 18 cents more for doing it. But if we did an extra job for the officers, something beyond military duty, and they ask what kind of reward that you want, we might get a little bit of a shot of something. But it's not Irish whiskey, I'll tell you that. I really miss that. It's something else. It's some kind of an island concoction. They call it rum. They get it from Cuba or somewhere down there below the Keys of Florida. So we don't know, but they get their rations. They get their rations. Sometimes, though, since we have to drink vinegar every day, sometimes at the fort, the quartermaster likes to distill his own. So some of the Irish boys, they might volunteer to assist him in that process, you see. And the distillation process goes through several steps, you might know. One of those steps has an alcohol content to it, so the quartermaster may look the other way as we test the batch and see if it's good enough to go through.
Paddy, you signed up. They tell you how long you were signed up for.
3 years, they say. 3 years. But they have been good to their promise that they get paid every month, $6 a month. We line up at the paymaster and call us the name. It comes up and Paddy, you're next, and I come up and he might hand me. He says, "Here's $3 and maybe 47 cents." I said, "Well, where's the rest?" He says, "I got the camp settler here next to me. He wants to get paid for playing cards and maybe a plug of tobacco or maybe a quarter cone of sugar if it's got a sweet to it, you see." So the paymaster takes that and washerwoman from the town. She says, "I wash all your whites, so I need to get paid for that. I need to get 67 cents for the month's work." So I'm lucky to get $1.50 maybe out of it. And if that, to make matters worse, before you get your pay, whatever's left, they will remove $1 per month, and put it aside, and they'll hold it for us. So they make sure that when we do get mustered out at that eventual time in the future, we get that money reimbursed to us, you see, so we don't go home empty pockets. And they say they're doing it for our benefit. I ask, what does it mean? He says, "Well, you soldiers, you tend to waste your money. You go and you gamble, and you buy it on things that you shouldn't. But we make sure that you leave the army one day, you'll have some money to take home with you." But you know what, my friend? I don't believe that's why they take the dollar away. I think they take it away as a deterrent against desertion. That's what I believe they do. Because if a soldier knows that the army still has some of his money waiting for him when he is mustered out, he's not going to desert. I wouldn't do it.
Well, where do you want to go home when you're done with this?
When I leave this man's army, I won't be settled in Florida, that's for sure. It'll be some civilized locale that I want to be.
Paddy, thanks for taking the time to chat with me about a soldier's life.
Well, it's my pleasure, my darling. I hope you have the blessings of the Irish with you in the future.
Paddy, thank you very much. I'll go on my way and look for Steve.
So, how'd you like Paddy?
I liked Paddy.
I do too. He's annoying as all get out sometimes, but I like him.
Steve, I'm giving away the game here, but as a Seminole War reenactor, why did you choose to portray a Irish-Immigrant private?
Since the majority of the soldiers during that time, the U.S. Army, were from other places, mostly in Europe, and of that number, most of them came from Ireland, and I just decided to say, well, since they were a whole boatload of Irish in the Army then, I thought I might portray one, an Irish-Immigrant. Started in 2010s.
How did your understanding of the Dade Battle change after you became a reenactor at the Dade Battle?
I became more interested in the details of it, not just the battle, but the details about the individual men involved on both sides. So I became interested in reading more about it, mostly from the Seminole Wars Foundation stock, and going to different kinds of sites during the year where they had battle reenactments, Okeechobee, Fort King, Paynes Creek, places like that I would go to, and talking with different people. And gets to be a little fraternity that you're in. You see the same people each time you go somewhere. and you just kind of follow along with them like old family. It's handy because you get to know each other. In the downtime, you're talking in the camp during a meal or in between battles, and you learn more about the times and about the people and about the accoutrements and about the strategies. A lot from each other, just having casual conversations.
What type of preparation goes in for reenacting at the Dade Battlefield or at other battlefields?
There's different kinds of reenactors, Patrick. Some authors that talk about reenacting in first, second, and third person. Most of the people that I know, they're talking to the public before or afterwards, they do what's called third person, which means that they live in the here and now, and they are simply portraying personage from that period of time. And so they can answer any kind of question. They can base it upon current events and that kind of thing. I choose not to do it that way. I choose to do it in the first person. So when I'm talking with people who are not part of our group, these are visitors to the event, I speak as if that I know nothing past 1835. And I talk about the politics of the time. I talk about the popular culture, if I have that much of an opportunity to talk about it. And I talk about what a soldier's perspective would have been of the foe that he's fighting, the politics of the time. Those aren't necessarily my viewpoints now, but I try to portray it as it would have been for the typical soldier of the period. And how you get to know that is simply to do research. You read all you can get. I can't stress enough talking to other fellow reenactors, because most of them have been doing it longer than I've been. And I respect these people. These are my friends. And speaking with them, you get to know if how you portray it is fully accurate, or if there's some holes in your story, if part of your uniform isn't really as it should be. Once you find that out, you take steps to have that corrected. Because your main goal as a first-person reenactor is to try to convey as much as humanly possible what the person who lived at that time period, who was in that situation, felt, what their opinions were, how they felt about what was happening around them and in the nation and in the world. And try as best as you can to emulate that kind of spirit. Of course, you can never really know for 100% what it was like. Nobody can ever do a perfect first-person rendition, because you aren't living in 1835. You haven't experienced firsthand all of your life what they did. You just try your very best because of your research, because of your sharing with others. Try to convey as much as you can the authenticity of the moment.
Although you've been portraying a Seminole Wars private for only about 10 years, your affiliation with Seminole Wars Matters goes back much further, hasn't it?
Yeah, I wasn't a member of anything prior to that, but I was in contact, and I was friends with a gentleman named Frank Walmer for well over 40 years. And he inspired me to think about Florida history and about the history around where we lived in particular. Right now I live less than a mile from the Fort King Road, and Frank had property on the Fort King Road, and so that kind of tipped me over the edge a little bit to get busier and to learn more about that aspect of our history.
You knew Frank Laumer for more than 40 years, and you didn't get involved as a reenactor until 10 years ago. What took you so long?
Well, Patrick, because of my work and my family. I was a teacher, then I became a school administrator, had a young family, and wanted to do things with them, and so I just didn't have the time. Because my way of looking at it is that if you want to get involved in something, you need to be able to afford to have the time to devote to it. And I didn't think that I had the time that I would like to put into something like that, so I just didn't get involved in any kind of a big way. After I retired, then I was wide open.
You were a high school teacher. I can't imagine what the subject was that you taught.
Well, try, because it wasn't history, it was science. I was a zoology major at the university. But, my first love always has been history, American history particularly. I got involved in the science aspect of it because I thought that there might be more job opportunities as a scientist than as a historian. And I was right. Got a job right away teaching school for science.
Did you have the opportunity to ever teach history?
Yeah, several times I had the opportunity to do it. When there was a problem with scheduling and with personnel issues and so forth, I was able to teach a section of American history once in a while, not very much. Taught it out of field according to Florida, because I was one methods course shy of being certified in history. If you just teach one course per day during the year out of field, you were okay at that time. And I ended up liking that one course per day more than I did the other four that I was teaching in science. I used to teach history linked with science all the time. I remember many times starting a unit, for instance, one on continental drift, and I took about 15 minutes looking about Alfred Wegener, a German scientist who actually developed that theory initially. And then one of the kids raised his hand and says, "Mr. Rinck," he says, "is this a class of history or science?" And my answer was yes. You have to understand how these things developed first before you learn about the concept.
What aspect of U.S. history were you teaching?
When I was teaching it, it was colonial history up through the Revolution, 8th grade class.
So how did you get your interest in the Seminole War period, which is roughly the first half of the 19th century?
Because of my friendship with Frank Walmer. He wrote several books. He wrote Massacre in the 60s, and he wrote a later one called Dade's Last Command in the mid-90s. I have copies of both of them. I used to be one of his neighbors, as a matter of fact, years ago. And our kids played together. Our wives were friends, and they did clip things together. And I didn't see him a lot, but I saw him often enough, and I was in contact with him and others like him often enough to really develop a passion for something. And I was interested in what was happening locally, and I still am. I enjoy locally connected history more than anything else, and that was what it was full of.
Prior to donning the sky blue uniform of the Seminole War era private, had you been going to battle reenactments?
One Seminole War battlefield reenactment, and that was at Dade Battlefield.
What was your impression?
Oh, I loved it. What wasn't there to like? They had this marvelous, dramatic rendition coming in, marching from stage left onto the field, outdoor amphitheater type arrangement. Had horses, they had cannon, they had soldiers and Seminoles, they had pyrotechnics. My wife and I were sitting on a blanket there watching the whole rendition. Plus 2 people, there were microphones, and were one Indian, one soldier, giving the play-by-play, blow-by-blow rendition to the audience.
So what year was that you went to the battle reenactment?
It was in 2008.
Then 2 years later, you put on an Army private's uniform from the era. What did you think you were getting into?
I had seen the battle several times, and I was a member of the board for a year prior to getting into that uniform. And so I knew what to expect. I mean, I knew what was out there. I just wanted to get involved in the midst of it myself. The irony of it is that that particular year is the year I became president of the board. And as such, I found it more difficult to actually participate in the battle each of 2 days because I was involved in the administrative aspect of it, trying to work it. So it ended up that I only did the battle 1 day out of 2 each year. But I still enjoyed it.
Ross Lamoureux, who's the president of the Dade Battlefield Society, often portrays Captain Gardner, one of the officers in the Dade battle. Did you ever portray a particular historical figure, or did you just portray a generic soldier?
Just a generic soldier. He was infantry, though, and not by any kind of willful design. It was just the fact that the tailor who custom designed my uniform asked me if I want the infantry white piping, and I said, sure, not thinking about the fact that there were only 10 infantrymen at the Dade battle. Now I like that because you just kind of stand out from the rest.
Was Ransom Clark infantry?
Ransom Clark was artillery. He had the yellow piping.
But lately you've been portraying Ransom Clark as Frank Laumer passed the baton to you. So have you changed your uniform's piping from white to yellow?
Yeah, but I know. But rather than use a yellow magic marker on my uniform, I just know that most of the people out there won't know the difference anyway, so I'm going to go ahead.
So Ross and Archie Marshall aren't on your case?
No, they haven't said anything. They don't dare.
Of course, I talked to Ross, and we went into about making sure that the uniforms are correct. But we didn't get into as much of saying, make sure if you're playing infantry, you have the infantry and not the artillery. We were talking more on not showing up in a Civil War uniform with a kepi and so forth. What have you been able to teach the public, and what have they been able to teach you from their questions and observations?
Well, one of the things I taught the public right away, standing in front of them in my uniform, I pointed out the white piping was not artillery. I talked to them about that right away. What I began with was the true statement that as I go out to the schools, particularly elementary schools, oftentimes I was asked a question similar to this: are you a Yankee or a rebel? And I would answer yes. Kids would look rather quizzically, and I would explain that the Second Seminole War happened a full quarter century before the Civil War began, and that the people who were in regular infantry or artillery uniforms were Army regulars, and that means that they could from any place in the country or overseas. I began teaching it that way, and I found out that having been a teacher, it's a lot easier talking with the public asking things of them, responding to their questions, than if I had just come on just cold. I was accustomed to that kind of environment. Questions that they've asked me depends upon their perspective, their point of view. I know too. There was one young man, a high school student from a local high school one time, and he asked me, he says, I just don't know what to believe out of somebody who's wearing the blue uniform. And I said, well, this blue uniform, like you say, it's very similar to the uniform that Robert E. Lee wore when he was a West Point cadet. The young man looked at me and says, it is? I said, yes. And his whole demeanor changed. So again, it's your point of view, your point of perspective, where you're coming from, the kind of questions that you would ask. And I answered them honestly and tried to point to the idea that this war, the Second Seminole War, for most people is a whole new concept that they haven't really considered, they haven't been introduced to. And even though we at Dade Battlefield, Seminole Wars Foundation, and others have been portraying it for well over a quarter century, more, 40 years, people still don't understand what it was, what happened, and why it happened. And so we're constantly trying to educate the public about the wars and about the impact that it had on American history in general.
So unreconstructed Southerners can actually say, oh, this is pre-Civil War. Oh, some of these Yankees were okay.
Yeah, antebellum.
Brian Cepeda has portrayed the Seminole side and the Seminole, we'd say, spokesman at the Dade Battlefield. And what he told me is he did it for a couple of years and that was fine, but what he really wanted to do was to get back into the fight. You've been in the fight, but then when Frank Laumer stepped back, you started doing Ransom Clark.
Well, I did that because of my friendship and my great admiration and respect for Frank. He began doing Ransom Clark in front of the public in 1980. And in 1980, he was in his early 50s. And he did it every year, and just very loyally. And he ended up doing it one of the two battle days. He had another person doing it on Saturday. He would do it on Sunday. And over the years, as all of us experience as we age, there are some infirmities upon us. Over the last few years, Frank's legs were not as strong as they used to be, and he wasn't able to stand out there and do the best job that he wanted to do because of his physical disability. And he called me one evening several years ago, and he explained to me that he could no longer do Ransom Clark narration. Couldn't stand there that long. And he asked me if I had somebody else in mind. So I said, well, Frank, I said, yeah, I'd have to give that some thought. And he says, well, I have somebody in mind. I'd like to tell you who it is. And I said, who's that? And he said, you. So I could have been knocked over by a feather. And I said, Frank, I said, you think I can pull it off? And he says, I know you can pull it off. So I was just so honored and so humbled by that. Of course, I agreed. And I promised Frank if he would allow me, I would do it every year, just as he had done one during the weekend on Sunday, until I got to the point where I couldn't do it anymore. That's how that started. So now I normally do the battle on Saturday, and another gentleman does the narration as Ransom, and then we switch around. And I did that.
For our listeners who are not that familiar, please tell us the significance of Ransom Clark and why he's used as a narrator at this battle recreation.
Ransom Clark was one of three, or perhaps four, if you look at some people's observations, survivors of the battle on the military side. And he made it back to Fort Brooke from whence he came in Tampa, along with one other of the soldiers. He was the one who did the most talking, did the most reporting to his superiors and others about what occurred at the battle. He was wounded 7 times, 7 different places in his body. It was amazing that he even survived at all, but he did. And he was reassigned to duty, and then shortly thereafter he was given a what they would call today a disability pension. He left the Army and made his living for the next 4.5 years going the lecture circuit around the area where he lived and into New England and elsewhere. He lived in upstate New York. Charged 12.5 cents a ticket to people come in, and so he could regale them with his experiences at the battle. But he was also had it down in writing. He wrote a pamphlet about his experiences. We feel that some of that today has been embellished by him. But there's enough truth of what he said, and it was proven later about his honesty about reporting. Because of Ransom Clark, and a little bit because of another Seminole chieftain's rendition, seemed to match up pretty well. So we have used Ransom Clark's reporting about what happened at the battle as the basis of what we do today. The basis of the books that were written by Frank Laumer, and those books are the basis of the production that we do every year in January at Dade Battlefield. So Ransom was quite an interesting person. Didn't live long after the battle, just lived 5 more years. Made a big impact, at least for us.
Steve, at the Dade Battle reenactment, why does the narrator portray Ransom Clark, a foot soldier, to represent the Army side?
For the audience, he's considered to be a survivor, the spirit returning to the scene of the battle. I do it just the way, well, not just the way, because nobody can do it like Frank Lomer did, but I do it in a similar fashion from what Frank started. He wrote the actual script on it, but I try to follow. His notion is that he has to come back every year to the site. He has to relive it. Maybe one time that his boys will win. Maybe they'll beat the Seminoles. Of course, they never do. But that's the idea about him coming back as a spirit and as a ghost. And so they don't really... He's out there on the battlefield. He just stands in the midst of all the firing around him. But, of course, nobody can see him. He doesn't get hit because he's just a spirit. The same thing for the Indian does the narration. Pedro Cepeda, one of the Indians over the years, some of the Seminoles who have done that narration, and he has the same thing. He is a spirit out there talking about the Native American side and what their issues and what their perspective was. And the crowd seems to enjoy both of them. In fact, most of the comments that we've had after the battle was over have been that they really enjoyed having the narration by both sides. It gave them a better idea, a more full picture as to what they were looking at and what the meaning of it was.
The Dade Battle reenactment is in the Dade Battlefield Park, but not on the Dade Battlefield Memorial Trail. Why is that?
It's offset a few hundred yards from the actual site. When the first public invitational started in 1980, there wasn't a battle yet. It was just talking from soldiers and from Seminoles. They began the battle in 1985, and it was still in the same area where the actual battle was. But they soon found out that it was just too inconvenient. There wasn't enough room because of where a road had been placed afterward for vehicles to drive through a paved road, where the breastworks were that the soldiers had set up, or our copy of that breastworks. There wasn't enough room around there to really do a battle, let alone have guests come to view it. And so much later, in the 1990s, there was a mound that was produced on what used to be a softball field in the park. And that mound eventually was created into kind of an amphitheater, and that's where the reenactment occurs today. So it's on the same property, in the same location? No, it's impossible to do it at the same location on top of the grounds. But it's as near as we could get to try to give an accurate picture of what it was like. In fact, it's even more accurate in its appearance where it is now than we're going to do it on the battlefield. Because over the years, people coming in from the city of Bushnell and the county of Sumter and elsewhere beyond that were using those grounds as a public park since late 1800s. Came state property in 1921, and over the years, people came in and began to cultivate more of the oaks rather than the pines that were there at the time. So actually, where we do the battle today has a lot more of the tall pine trees in that location that was really what it was like at the time that Major Dade and his men came through. So appearance-wise, in my opinion, it looks better where it is now, more authentic where it is now, than if we were to go back to the actual battle site itself.
On other weekends of the year, when the annual battle reenactment is not taking place, small groups can go to the Memorial Trail.
Well, the groups that have come through are school groups have come through at all levels of schooling. Community people who come in from one of the local clubs that they have in Bushnell. The Airstream Club has come in and done things, ROTC groups. But the one that I personally enjoy the most are the military people who come in with staff rides on occasion. The first one, to my knowledge, started about 7 to 9 years ago, and that was the Florida National Guard came through. But there's been a really steady service of the of military folks from the Joint Task Force people up in Norfolk, Virginia, and they've come through, and they have some of the best groups of all to learn about it, because they're folks that are up and coming rising officers, and in order to get qualified to be promoted, as I understand it, to flag rank, to upper levels of their military experience, that they had to take coursework. But part of the coursework involves staff rides, and so Dade Battlefield is part of their curriculum because of the action that happened there and the lessons that they can learn today, which has similarities to what happened back in 1835.
Steve Rinck, thanks for joining us today for the Seminole Wars.
It was a pleasure. I'd like to talk to you again sometime. I've got more information for you.
If you enjoyed this show, please take a moment to like us on Facebook at Seminole Wars Foundation. Leave a review on iTunes or your favorite podcast provider. Your reviews and comments help new listeners discover us and help us keep the show going. Visit our website at www.seminolewars.us for blogs, articles, news, books, events, membership information, and how to subscribe to this podcast. We'll be back soon with a new episode of the Seminole Wars Podcast. The Seminole Wars Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to preservation, education, and publication of Seminole Wars history throughout the state of Florida. This podcast is copyrighted the Seminole Wars Foundation 2021. All rights reserved. Front bumper music, The Devil's Garden, Roast 'em, provided by kind permission of Rita Youngman. Back bumper music, Second Seminole Win, by Jed Merrim and Ricky Pittman, courtesy of Ricky Pittman. All rights reserved.